One snowy winter night in Chicago, a young billionaire tossed a piece of paper into a trash can and heard a small voice whisper, "Please don't close the lid." He approached and looked inside to find a little girl trembling, whispering that she had waited for her mother for 3 days, but she hadn't returned, and that what happened next would change both their lives forever. Snow drifts through the streetlights near Millennium Park, turning Chicago into a hush of white. Ethan Vale walks like a man trying not to take up space, gray overcoat-gloved hands, mind stuck on numbers. He crumples a meeting note, an idea that died in a boardroom, and tosses it into a public trash bin. A beat of silence. Then tiny and sharp, "Hey, I'm in here." Ethan freezes so hard the cold feels like it cracked his spine. He steps back, scanning the empty plaza. No one, just wind slipping between buildings. He leans closer, heart misfiring. A second whisper, "Please, don't close it." His breath stutters. He grips the rim and peers down. Two enormous eyes stare up at him, dark, wet, alert. A child's eyes? A small girl curled tight among paper and wrappers, shivering so violently her teeth click like a broken metronome. Ethan's brain screams, "Call someone." His body doesn't move. He only manages, "Oh my God." "Sweetheart, what are you doing in there?" The girl's voice is thin but steady. It's warmer than the wind. That sentence, too practical, too grown, splits Ethan's life into before and after. Ethan crouches, hands hovering as if he's afraid to touch reality. Okay, I'm going to help you. I'm not going to hurt you." The child flinches when he says the word police under his breath. Her shoulders jump like she's been trained by fear. No, she whispers, clinging to the inside of the bin. "Don't." Ethan swallows. He takes off his coat anyway and drapes it down like a tent blocking the wind. He speaks softly, slow, like calming a frightened animal, not because she is one, but because the world has treated her like one. "What's your name?" She hesitates, then shakes her head. Her lips look bluish from the cold, her cheeks dirty, her hair tangled and damp with snow. Ethan's chest tightens an unfamiliar ache. "I'm Ethan," he says, tapping his own chest. "Ethan, can you hold my hands?" For a second he expects her to recoil. Instead, she reaches up. Her hands are icy, so small that Ethan's fingers swallow them. He lifts her carefully, the way you lift something priceless that might break. She weighs almost nothing. That scares him more than the voice did. As he carries her away from the bin, she presses her forehead against his shoulder, like she's been waiting for a safe place her whole life. Ethan's mind runs, "This is risky. This is wrong. This is unnecessary." He walks into the storm with the child in his arms, and no plan, except one: she is not going back in that trash bin. Ethan's condo overlooks the city, glass, steel, clean lines, silence. Tonight the silence feels shameful. He wraps the girl in a thick blanket, sets a mug of warm cocoa in her hands, and tries not to look panicked. He helps her wash up, careful, respectful, keeping it strictly safe and practical. He gives her an oversized t-shirt as pajamas. She sits on his couch like she's afraid the furniture might punish her. "You're safe here," Ethan says. "No one's going to hurt you." Her gaze flicks to exits, corners the door chain like she's memorizing escape routes. That observation lands in Ethan's chest like a bruise. He kneels to her level. "Can you tell me where your family is?" For a long time, she says nothing. Then quietly, "My mom said she'd come back." Ethan's throat tightens. "And she didn't." The girl's fingers clamp around the mug. She nods. "How long were you alone?" She answers like she's describing the weather. 3 days. Ethan stares, stunned. 3 days. "Mila, that's..." He stops. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She lifts her eyes. "I waited on the bench." People walked away. That sentence, so small, so casual, makes Ethan feel something he hasn't felt in years: rage at the world. Ethan gently asks questions, careful not to overwhelm her. Why didn't you go inside a store, ask someone for help? She shrugs. I was dirty. People didn't want me near them. Ethan exhales slow. He hates that she knows this. And the trash bin. It started hurting to breathe outside, she says. Wind hurts. The bin has no wind. Ethan's eyes burn. He forces his voice to stay calm. You were smart. You did what you had to do to survive the cold. The girl's face shifts just a flicker, like she's not used to adults calling her choices smart, like she's used to blame. What's your name? Ethan asks again. She hesitates, then whispers, Mommy called me Mila. He repeats it like a promise. Mila. A yawn steals through her tiny body, exhaustion folding her in half. Ethan shows her the guest room. Clean bed, warm heater, soft nightlight. Can I really stay? She asks, shocked by permission. Ethan nods. For tonight, absolutely. Her eyes widen. You'll come back. He kneels again. I will. She studies him like a detective who's been disappointed before. Then she lies down, clutching the blanket like it's proof of a better world. Ethan leaves the door cracked, because she wants it that way. And in the hallway, he realizes something terrifying. His life has already changed. Morning arrives with small footsteps. Ethan wakes to find Mila by the window, staring at the snow like it's an old enemy. You hungry? He asks. She nods immediately, then tries to hide it, embarrassed by need. Ethan makes scrambled eggs and toast like a man defusing a bomb. Mila eats carefully at first, then faster, like her body remembers scarcity. Ethan watches her watch him, checking if he's real, if he's leaving. I have to go out, he says softly, to buy you clothes, food, things you need. Fear flashes across her face so fast it's almost invisible. You'll come back. Ethan kneels, eye level steady. Mila, I'm coming back, I promise. She searches his expression for cracks, then nods once. Okay, he adds. You can come with me if you want. Her whole face changes, like someone turned on a light. Really, Ethan realizes this is the first time he's seen her look like a child. Really, he says. We'll do it together. The shopping mall was warm, bright, and loud with the sound of people enjoying their Saturday. For Ethan Vale, it felt strangely unfamiliar, like stepping into a different world. For Mila, it was something else entirely. It was wonder. She walked beside him with small, cautious steps, holding the sleeve of his coat, as if afraid the crowd might carry him away. Every light, every colorful sign, every laughing child seemed to pull her attention in 100 directions at once. Stay close to me, Ethan said gently. She nodded quickly. They entered a department store, and Ethan immediately realized he had no idea where to begin. Rows of tiny coats, boots, sweaters, and dresses surrounded them. He had never paid attention to children's clothing before. Now every rack looked important. A saleswoman approached with a friendly smile. Can I help you? Ethan hesitated only a second before gesturing toward Mila. We need everything. The woman glanced at Mila with soft eyes. Your daughter is adorable. How old is she? Ethan felt the word daughter echo strangely in his chest. He did not correct her. 5, he replied quietly. Mila peeked out from behind him, her dark eyes studying the stranger carefully. The next hour passed in a gentle blur. Mila tried on warm boots, thick socks, winter coats, and soft pajamas covered in tiny stars. Each time she stepped out of the fitting room, she looked uncertain, like she was waiting for someone to say the clothes were not really hers. But Ethan only smiled. A blue dress caught her attention. She turned slowly in front of the mirror, watching the fabric move like water. You look wonderful, Ethan said. Mila glanced up at him nervously. Can I keep it? Ethan nodded immediately. Of course. Her smile appeared slowly, cautiously, like sunlight breaking through clouds. After clothes came the toy store. Mila stood frozen at the entrance. Shelves full of dolls, puzzles, and stuffed animals stretched across the room like a dream. Choose something, Ethan encouraged. She walked carefully between the aisles before finally picking 3 things: a small teddy bear, a box of crayons, and a simple doll. Only these, Ethan asked. Mila hugged the bear to her chest. This is enough. That quiet gratitude hit Ethan harder than anything else that day. When they left the mall carrying several bags, snow had started falling again outside. Mila slipped her small hand into Ethan's. For the first time since he found her in that trash bin, Ethan saw something different in her eyes. Not fear, hope. Life inside Ethan's apartment began to change in ways he never expected. Before Mila arrived, the space had been perfectly organized. Every book aligned, every surface clean. The refrigerator contained little more than bottled water and takeout leftovers. Now the apartment was slowly becoming something else. Something alive. The first change came from the refrigerator door. One afternoon, Mila taped a drawing to it using bright green tape she had found in the kitchen drawer. The drawing showed 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a giant yellow sun. That's you and me, Mila explained proudly. Ethan studied the drawing for a long moment. No one had ever drawn him into their world before. Because Ethan still needed to work during the day, he arranged for someone trustworthy to care for Mila while he was gone. That was how Hattie Bloom entered their lives. Hattie was 62 years old, a retired schoolteacher with soft gray hair and calm, patient eyes. She had the kind of voice that made nervous children feel safe. When she first met Mila, she knelt down instead of standing over her. "Hello there," Hattie said warmly. "I hear you like strawberries." Mila blinked in surprise. "I do." "Well, that makes 2 of us," Hattie replied. Trust did not appear instantly, but it grew quickly. Within a few days, Hattie had helped Mila establish small routines: morning breakfast, drawing time, reading time, and walks to the park near the apartment building. Meanwhile, Ethan began leaving the office earlier than he ever had before. At 5 o'clock sharp, his colleagues stared at him in disbelief. "Big meeting tonight," one of them joked. "No," Ethan replied calmly as he grabbed his coat. Something more important. Evenings soon developed their own rhythm. Mila would run to the door the moment she heard Ethan's keys. "Guess what we did today," she would announce. Sometimes she talked about the park swings. Sometimes about the stories Hattie read to her. Sometimes about the strange shapes she discovered when drawing clouds. One evening, Ethan found her sitting on the living room floor surrounded by crayons. "What are you drawing now?" he asked. "A house," Mila answered. Ethan smiled. "That's a very colorful house. It has a garden," she explained, adding another green line. "And a swing." Then she looked up at him. "And you live there too." Ethan felt a quiet warmth spread through his chest. For the first time in years, the apartment no longer felt like a place he simply returned to after work. It felt like somewhere he belonged. It was nearly 2 in the morning when Ethan woke suddenly. At first he thought the sound had come from the wind outside, but then he heard it again. A small, frightened voice. "Ethan!" He sat up instantly. The bedroom door slowly creaked open, letting in a thin line of hallway light. Mila stood there wearing her new pajamas covered with tiny unicorns. Her teddy bear was clutched tightly in her arms. Her face was wet with tears. "Mila, what happened?" Ethan asked softly. She did not answer. Instead, she hurried across the room and climbed onto the bed beside him, wrapping her arms around him with surprising strength. Her small body trembled like a leaf in the wind. "It's okay," Ethan murmured, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "Was it a bad dream?" Mila nodded against his chest. He waited patiently before asking, "Do you want to tell me about it?" For several seconds, she remained silent. Then she whispered, "I was back on the bench." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. It was snowing again, she continued quietly. "I called for my mom. I called and called, but nobody came." Ethan gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "That was just a dream," he said softly. "You're safe here." Mila pulled back slightly so she could look directly into his eyes. Her expression was serious in a way that seemed far too mature for a 5-year-old child. "Are you going to disappear too?" The question struck Ethan like a sudden storm. For a moment he could not speak. He took both of Mila's hands in his. "Look at me," he said quietly. She did. "I'm here," Ethan continued, "and I'm not going anywhere." Mila searched his face carefully. "Promise?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "I promise." Slowly the tension left her small shoulders. She lay down beside him, still holding the teddy bear, and rested her head against his arm. Within minutes, her breathing became steady again, but Ethan remained awake long after she fell asleep. Because in that moment, he finally understood something important. Taking Mila home that night had not just been an act of kindness. It had been the beginning of a promise that he now intended to keep. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since Mila entered Ethan Vale's life, and the quiet apartment overlooking downtown Chicago had begun to change in ways Ethan never imagined possible. Color had appeared where silence once lived. Drawings now covered the refrigerator door, the hallway wall, and even a corner of Ethan's office desk. Stick figures, suns with smiling faces, crooked houses, and bright clouds created a small gallery of childhood imagination. One Sunday afternoon, Ethan sat at the kitchen table reviewing financial reports on his laptop, while Mila worked on a new drawing beside him. Her small tongue peeked from the corner of her mouth as she concentrated on every careful line. "Want to show me?" Ethan asked. Mila pushed the paper toward him with pride. Ethan smiled at first. The drawing showed the familiar 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a giant sun. But this time there was someone else. A third figure stood beside them, a tall woman with long dark hair wearing a blue dress. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. "Who's this?" he asked gently. Mila pointed to the figure without hesitation. "That's Mommy." Ethan nodded slowly. The word lingered in the air between them. "She's looking for me," Mila added with simple certainty. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair. In recent days, Mila had rarely mentioned her mother. She had adjusted so naturally to life inside the apartment that sometimes Ethan almost forgot their situation had begun as something temporary. "Do you remember much about her?" he asked carefully. Mila frowned thoughtfully. "She sang to me at night," she said, "and she had a blue dress. She wore it when she talked to people on the street." Ethan listened quietly. Each small detail felt like another piece of a puzzle he still didn't understand. "Do you miss her?" he asked. Mila thought about the question for several seconds before answering. "Sometimes," she admitted. Then she added something that struck Ethan much harder than he expected. "But now I have you." Her voice was simple and sincere. Not dramatic, not desperate. Just true. Ethan forced himself to smile and gently ruffled her hair. "I'm glad you have me," he said. But as Mila returned to coloring the bright red roof of the house in her drawing, Ethan found it impossible to focus on his work again. He stared at the picture taped to the refrigerator door later that evening. 3 figures holding hands. The woman in the blue dress. For the first time since Mila arrived, Ethan understood something clearly. He had to find her mother. Not because he wanted Mila to leave, but because both of them deserved to know the truth. The problem appeared unexpectedly on a quiet Tuesday evening. Mila barely touched her dinner. Normally, she asked endless questions while Ethan cooked. Why were tomatoes red? Why did birds sleep standing up? Could clouds fall down? But that night, she was silent. "Mila, are you feeling okay?" Ethan asked. She shook her head slightly. When Ethan reached out and touched her forehead, his stomach dropped. She was burning with fever. Within seconds, the calm order of the apartment turned into controlled urgency. Ethan ran a lukewarm bath, gave the proper children's fever medicine from the small emergency kit he had bought weeks earlier, and encouraged Mila to drink water. Still, the fever climbed. By midnight, Ethan was sitting in the waiting room of a pediatric emergency clinic. Mila curled against his chest under a blanket. The nurse behind the desk smiled politely. "Full name?" she asked while typing into the computer. Ethan hesitated. Mila?" The nurse looked up. Last name. Ethan felt the truth hit him all at once. He didn't know. Or at least he didn't know officially. "Mila Reyes," he said slowly, using the last name Mila had once mentioned for her mother. "Date of birth?" Ethan froze again. "I'm not sure of the exact date," he admitted. The nurse's expression changed from routine to curious. "Insurance card, I didn't bring one." She paused. Then came the question Ethan had been dreading. "Are you her father?" Ethan looked down at the small girl sleeping against his shoulder. "I'm her guardian," he answered honestly. "We're in the process of sorting out her legal situation." The nurse studied him for a moment, then nodded. "We'll treat the child first," she said calmly. "Paperwork can come later." The diagnosis turned out to be a throat infection, painful but manageable. Yet the experience left Ethan shaken in a way he hadn't expected. Because while Mila slept peacefully in her bed later that night, Ethan sat alone in the living room, staring at the city lights. For the first time, he understood something clearly. Love was not enough. If he truly wanted to protect Mila, she needed more than warmth and food and bedtime stories. She needed something official. She needed a name in the system. She needed a future that no accident could erase. And that meant Ethan had to face the one thing he had avoided until now. The law. The next morning, Ethan did something completely unusual. He didn't go to the office. Instead, he drove straight to the Cook County Family Court building, a tall gray structure that looked more intimidating than any boardroom he had ever entered. Inside, the hallways smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Parents sat on hard benches. Lawyers hurried past with folders under their arms. A security officer pointed Ethan toward the family services desk. A woman with reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose listened carefully as Ethan explained everything. How he found Mila. How she had been alone. How he brought her home. When he finished, the woman leaned back in her chair. "So let me understand this," she said slowly. "You found an abandoned child and decided to take her home instead of immediately contacting authorities. When she said it that way, it sounded reckless, maybe even illegal." Ethan nodded. "Yes," he admitted. "And now you want to legalize guardianship?" "Yes." The woman studied him over the rim of her glasses. "Children are not stray animals you simply adopt because you feel like it," she said firmly. "There are procedures." "I understand," Ethan replied calmly. "That's why I'm here." For a moment, the woman said nothing. Then her tone softened slightly. "There is one possible option," she explained. "Temporary guardianship while the child's situation is investigated. That requires a home inspection, income verification, and a psychological evaluation." "I can provide all of that," Ethan said immediately. "There's another complication," she continued. "Without a birth certificate or identification, registering the child will be difficult." Ethan felt the familiar weight of uncertainty return. "What if we don't know her exact birthday?" he asked. "There is a process called delayed birth registration," the woman replied. "It's complex, but it can be done." She slid a thick stack of forms across the desk. Ethan picked them up. The paperwork looked endless. But for the first time since that night in the snow, the path ahead felt clear. He stood and thanked her before leaving the office. Outside the courthouse, the Chicago wind blew sharply across the street. Ethan tightened his coat and looked up at the sky. For most of his life, he had measured success by contracts and profits. Now, success meant something very different. It meant protecting a little girl who trusted him enough to fall asleep without fear. And if the world had never officially noticed Mila before, then Ethan Vale was about to make sure it did. Spring slowly began to soften the edges of Chicago. The snow melted into narrow rivers along the sidewalks, and small green buds appeared on the trees in the park near Ethan Vale's apartment. With the warmer weather came something else Ethan hadn't expected: routine. Life with Mila settled into a rhythm that felt strangely natural. Every morning, Ethan woke early to prepare breakfast before leaving for work. Pancakes on Sundays, eggs and toast on weekdays. A small glass of orange juice placed carefully beside Mila's plate. At first, she ate quietly, still unsure if the food would always be there. But as days passed, her appetite grew stronger. Her questions returned, too. "Why are pigeons always walking instead of flying?" she asked one morning. Ethan smiled as he poured her cereal. "I think they're just saving energy." Mila considered this answer very seriously. "That's smart," she concluded. During the day, Hattie Bloom stayed with her, reading stories, drawing pictures, and taking short walks to the playground nearby. The park had quickly become Mila's favorite place, especially the swings. Higher, she would shout with laughter. Ethan stood nearby, every time, one hand ready behind her back. He never let go completely, but he also tried not to hold too tightly. She needed freedom. That was something Ethan understood now. Evenings became the most important part of the day. When Ethan returned home from work, Mila ran to the door the moment she heard his keys turning in the lock. "You're back." Those two words carried a weight Ethan still struggled to describe. They cooked simple dinners together. Mila stood on a wooden stool to reach the kitchen counter, while Ethan prepared pasta or soup. "Can I stir the sauce?" she asked one evening. "Of course," Ethan said, handing her the wooden spoon. She stirred carefully, her face full of concentration. Dinner conversations often wandered in unpredictable directions. Why does the moon follow the car at night? Where do fish sleep? Do clouds ever get tired? Sometimes Ethan knew the answers. Sometimes he searched them on his phone while Mila waited patiently beside him. Later came bath time, then the nightly ritual that had quickly become sacred: bedtime stories. Ethan didn't own many children's books, so he invented stories instead, tales about brave explorers, talking animals, and children who discovered secret worlds hidden in ordinary places. Mila listened with wide eyes. "One more story," she always asked. "Tomorrow," Ethan replied gently. When he closed her bedroom door each night, leaving it slightly open the way she liked. Ethan often paused in the hallway, because the apartment felt different now. Before Mila arrived, the silence had felt comfortable. Now it would have felt lonely. And for the first time in years, Ethan Vale realized something surprising. He didn't want the quiet life he once thought he loved. He wanted this. Despite the growing warmth inside the apartment, one question continued to follow Ethan everywhere. Who was Mila's mother? The drawing of the woman in the blue dress remained taped to the refrigerator, quietly reminding him that Mila had a life before he found her. And somewhere in that life was a woman named Serena Reyes. One evening after Mila fell asleep, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table with his laptop open. The screen glowed softly in the dark room as he searched for shelters, outreach programs, and organizations that worked with homeless families across Chicago. There were dozens. Some helped women with children. Others offered temporary housing or medical support. Ethan made a list. The next day, during his lunch break, he visited the first shelter on the list. A social worker greeted him politely but cautiously. Her name was Laura. "I'm trying to find someone," Ethan explained. "Her name might be Serena Reyes. She has a daughter named Mila." Laura studied the photograph Ethan had brought with him. "I can't give information about our residents," she said carefully, "but I can ask around." Ethan nodded. "I understand. I just want to know if the girl's mother is safe." Laura wrote down Ethan's phone number and promised to contact him if she learned anything. Over the following days, Ethan continued visiting other shelters and community centers whenever his schedule allowed. Each place offered the same uncertain response. Some people thought they had seen a woman with dark hair and a small child months earlier. Others remembered someone wearing a blue dress while asking for spare change near train stations. But none of the information was clear enough to lead anywhere. Meanwhile, Mila's life continued to grow brighter. She discovered the joy of library visits, carefully choosing picture books that she insisted Ethan read every night. She learned how to ride the swings higher than before, and she began asking questions about Ethan's past. "Did you have a mom and dad when you were little?" she asked one evening. "Yes," Ethan replied with a smile. "Are they nice?" "They are." Mila nodded thoughtfully. "My mommy used to say my dad was a prince who went far away," she said quietly. "But I think that was just a story." Ethan didn't correct her. Instead, he simply said, "Sometimes grown-ups tell stories because the truth is complicated." Mila accepted that explanation with a small shrug. Then she added something that stayed with Ethan long after she fell asleep that night. "It's okay," she said. "I have you now." But Ethan knew something Mila didn't yet understand. The truth about her past was still out there somewhere, and sooner or later, it would find them. The phone call came 3 weeks later. Ethan was finishing a meeting at his office when his phone vibrated on the table. The number was unfamiliar. He almost ignored it. Something made him answer. "Hello, Mr. Vale," a calm female voice said. "My name is Sarah. I'm calling from Hope Harbor Women's Shelter." Ethan straightened in his chair. "Yes. You left a photograph with us about 3 weeks ago," Sarah continued. "You were asking about a woman named Serena Reyes." Ethan felt his heart begin to pound. "Yes. Did you find something?" There was a brief pause. "We admitted a woman yesterday," Sarah said carefully. "But I should warn you, she isn't in good. But I should warn you, she isn't in good health." 20 minutes later, Ethan parked outside the small brick building that housed Hope Harbor. The shelter was modest but clean, its front windows glowing softly in the evening light. Sarah greeted him at the door. She looked tired but kind, the way people often do after years of helping others carry heavy stories. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said quietly. They walked down a narrow hallway toward a small room at the back of the building. Sarah stopped before opening the door. "She's very weak," she explained. "Please be gentle." Ethan nodded. Inside the room, a woman sat in a chair near the window wrapped in a thin blanket. Her dark hair fell loosely around a pale face. But her eyes, Ethan recognized them instantly. They were the same deep, dark eyes Mila had. The woman looked up slowly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she whispered in a voice barely louder than the wind outside. "You found her." Ethan felt the weight of months of questions settle in his chest. "Yes," he replied softly. "She's safe." Tears filled the woman's eyes. "My Mila," she whispered. And in that quiet room, Ethan Vale finally understood. The story he thought had begun with a voice inside a trash bin had actually started long before that night. Ethan Vale sat across from the fragile woman by the window, struggling to reconcile the image in front of him with the one he had imagined for months. Serena Reyes looked far younger than the exhaustion written across her face. Her dark hair framed hollow cheeks, and the thin blanket over her shoulders seemed unable to hide how weak she had become. But her eyes were unmistakable. They were Mila's eyes. "You found her?" Serena whispered again. "Yes," Ethan replied softly. "She's safe. She's warm. She's doing well." The tension in Serena's shoulders eased as if those words alone lifted a great weight she had been carrying. "Thank God," she breathed. For a moment, silence filled the room. Ethan knew the question he had carried since that winter night could no longer wait. "Why did she wait 3 days?" he asked gently. "Why didn't you come back for her?" Serena's eyes closed. When she spoke again, her voice trembled. "I didn't mean to leave her like that." She took a slow breath, gathering the strength to continue. I took Mila with me to the hospital that day. I was feeling very sick. While we were waiting, I told her to sit on the bench outside the square for just a few minutes while I spoke to the receptionist. Her fingers tightened around the blanket, but I collapsed before I even reached the desk. Ethan leaned forward slightly. They kept me in the intensive care unit, Serena continued. I lost a lot of blood. They sedated me. I didn't wake up for 3 days. The same 3 days Mila had waited alone. When I woke up, Serena said quietly, "The first thing I asked was where my daughter was." No one knew who I was talking about. Ethan felt the pieces of the story fall into place. When they finally released me, she said I ran back to the bench. She wasn't there. Her voice broke. I searched everywhere. I asked people in the streets. But I was weak, and I kept getting sicker. Ethan's anger from months before slowly dissolved into something else. Understanding. "Why didn't you call the police?" he asked carefully. Serena gave a tired smile. "People like me don't always trust systems that require papers we don't have," she said softly. "Mila was born in a shelter. I never managed to register her. I was afraid she would disappear into the system." She looked up at Ethan again. "Then yesterday, someone at the shelter showed me the photo you left." Her eyes filled with tears, and I knew someone good had found her. The quiet room at Hope Harbor seemed to shrink as Serena spoke. Ethan watched the fragile woman carefully. Every breath she took looked like it required effort. "How sick are you?" he asked gently. Serena did not try to hide the truth. "Liver cancer," she said. "Late stage." The words hung heavily in the air. "I didn't know at first," she continued. "I was tired all the time, dizzy, weak. By the time doctors figured it out, it was already too late." Ethan sat in silence, trying to absorb the weight of her story. Serena reached slowly toward a small worn bag resting beside her chair. "There are 2 things I need you to take," she said. Her fingers trembled as she opened the bag and removed a tiny box and a sealed envelope. "This is for Mila." Ethan opened the box carefully. Inside lay a delicate silver necklace with a small star-shaped pendant. "It belonged to my grandmother," Serena explained. "When Mila was born, I promised it would be hers one day." The star caught the light from the window and shimmered softly, and the letter Ethan asked. Serena glanced at the envelope. "It explains everything," she said quietly. "Why I couldn't always protect her. Why I tried. How much I loved her." Ethan closed the box gently. "She talks about you sometimes," he said. Serena's eyes brightened for a brief moment. "What does she say?" "She remembers you singing to her at night." A faint smile appeared on Serena's face. "I used to sing the same song every evening," she said. "She liked when I repeated her name." Silence settled again. Finally, Serena reached forward and took Ethan's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Please don't bring her here," she whispered. "I don't want Mila to see me like this." Ethan nodded slowly. "She deserves to remember you strong," he said. Serena closed her eyes in relief. "Promise me something else," she said after a moment. Ethan met her gaze. "Promise me she'll grow up happy." The request was simple, but Ethan understood its weight. "I promise," he said. Serena's shoulders relaxed for the first time since he entered the room, and Ethan knew that promise would shape the rest of his life. When Ethan Vale stepped outside Hope Harbor that evening, the Chicago air felt colder than usual. The small silver necklace and Serena's letter rested safely inside his coat pocket, but they seemed heavier than anything he had ever carried. For several minutes, Ethan remained seated inside his parked car without starting the engine. Serena Reyes would not live much longer. Both of them understood that without saying it aloud. The reality of that truth raised a difficult question Ethan could not yet answer. How would he ever explain this to Mila? She was still just a child, too young to understand illness loss, and the complicated choices adults sometimes make when life becomes impossible. Ethan decided one thing with certainty. The truth would come one day, but not tonight. That night, Mila was waiting for him at home. When Ethan finally returned to the apartment, Mila ran toward the door the moment she heard his keys. "You're back." She wrapped her arms tightly around his waist. Ethan knelt down and hugged her just as tightly. "Yes," he said softly. "I'm back." She pulled away and looked up at him curiously. "You look tired." "I had a long day," Ethan admitted. "Did you solve your important problem?" Mila asked. Ethan smiled gently. "I think I'm getting closer." Mila seemed satisfied with that answer. That evening they followed their usual routine. Dinner together, a short story before bed, and finally the quiet moment when Ethan tucked Mila beneath her blanket. "Good night," he whispered. "Good night," Mila replied sleepily. As Ethan turned to leave the room, Mila suddenly spoke again. "Ethan, yes." She hesitated. "Are you still going to stay?" The question reminded him of the promise he made during her nightmare weeks earlier. Ethan walked back to the bed and gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "I'm still here," he said, "and I'm not going anywhere." Mila nodded slowly, her eyes closing again. Within minutes, she was asleep. Ethan stood quietly in the doorway for a long moment. Inside his pocket, the silver star necklace rested against Serena's letter. Two small objects carrying the story of Mila's past and the responsibility for her future. Ethan closed the door softly, because the promise he made at Hope Harbor and the promise he made to Mila were now the same promise, and he intended to keep both. Autumn arrived quietly in Chicago. Leaves turned shades of red and gold, drifting across sidewalks and gathering along the edges of the park where Mila loved to play. Nearly 6 months had passed since Ethan Vale first heard a small voice inside a trash bin on a freezing winter night. 6 months of paperwork. 6 months of interviews, inspections, and long meetings with lawyers and social workers. 6 months of waiting. One afternoon, Ethan returned home earlier than usual and found a large envelope resting inside the mailbox. The return address immediately caught his attention. Cook County Family Court. His hands felt strangely unsteady as he carried the envelope upstairs to the apartment. He set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for several seconds before finally opening it. Inside was a single official document. Ethan read the words slowly. Then he read them again. Mila Reyes, adoption approved. Legal name Mila Vale. For a long moment, Ethan simply sat there in silence. The city outside the window continued its usual rhythm, cars passing, distant sirens, the hum of evening traffic. But inside the apartment, everything felt still. 6 months ago, Mila had been invisible to the world. No records, no official identity. Now she had a legal name, a home, a family. The sound of the front door opening interrupted Ethan's thoughts. Mila burst into the apartment with the same energy she carried every afternoon after school. Her backpack bounced against her shoulders as she ran toward him. "Guess what happened today?" Ethan quickly slid the document beneath a magazine on the table. "What happened?" he asked with a smile. "I got a gold star for my drawing," Mila announced proudly. "That's amazing." She climbed onto a chair beside him. "Why are you home early?" Ethan studied her small, excited face. Because tonight he would tell her the news that officially changed both of their lives. "I thought we should celebrate something," he said. Her eyes widened. "Celebrate what?" Ethan smiled. "How about dinner at the Italian restaurant you like, the one with the spaghetti?" Mila asked immediately. "The one with the spaghetti?" She jumped down from the chair with excitement. "Yes." Ethan watched her run down the hallway toward her room to change clothes. For the first time since leaving the courthouse, he allowed himself to breathe fully. Because the promise he had made months earlier to protect Mila, to give her a future, was no longer just an intention. It was now written on paper. And tonight, Mila would finally learn that the family she already believed in was now official for the entire world. The small Italian restaurant sat on a quiet corner just a few blocks from Ethan's apartment. It had quickly become one of Mila's favorite places. The owner, an elderly man named Paolo, greeted them warmly every time they walked through the door. "Ah, Mr. Vale," and little Mila, Paolo said with a wide smile. "Your table is ready?" Tonight the table looked slightly different. A small candle flickered beside a vase of white flowers. Mila noticed immediately. "Why does our table look fancy?" she asked as she climbed into her chair. Ethan sat across from her, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Because tonight is a special night," he said. Paolo soon brought their food, spaghetti and meatballs for Mila, lasagna for Ethan. Mila began eating happily, completely unaware of the envelope resting inside Ethan's coat pocket. After a few minutes, Ethan finally took a deep breath. "Mila," he said gently. She looked up, sauce on the corner of her mouth. "Yes. Do you remember when I told you we were working on your documents so you could go to school and see doctors easily?" Mila nodded. "You said I needed to exist on paper too." "That's right." Ethan removed the folded document from his pocket and placed it carefully on the table. "Well, it finally happened." Mila leaned forward curiously. "What does it say?" Ethan pointed to the line printed in bold letters. "It says that you are officially my daughter now." She blinked. For a second, she didn't seem to understand. "Officially, yes," Ethan said softly. "Legally. Forever." He pointed again to the name written beneath. "It also says your new name is Mila Vale." Mila stared at the paper. Then she looked up at Ethan. "Like your name, exactly like mine." Her face slowly lit up with realization. "So that means—" She slid off her chair and rushed around the table, throwing her arms around Ethan's neck. "You're my real dad now." Ethan hugged her tightly, laughing quietly through the sudden emotion filling his chest. "I guess that makes it official," he said. Mila held on to him for a moment longer before pulling back. "I already knew you were staying," she said confidently. Ethan smiled. "I'm glad you did." The candlelight flickered between them as Mila returned to her seat, still smiling widely. For Ethan, the moment felt larger than the document on the table, because the truth was something he had understood long before the judge signed those papers. Families were not always created by blood. Sometimes they were created by a promise kept. And tonight, that promise had finally been given a name. A full year passed after the judge signed the adoption papers. The apartment that once felt quiet and perfectly organized now carried the comfortable chaos of family life. Mila's drawings covered the refrigerator door, her school books were stacked beside the couch, and a growing collection of storybooks filled the shelves near her bed. Every morning, Ethan walked Mila to school. Every evening they shared dinner stories and the simple routines that slowly build a life together. But there was one part of Mila's story Ethan had not yet told her. The truth about her mother. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Ethan decided the time had come. Mila was sitting on the living room floor, building a small tower out of wooden blocks, when Ethan joined her on the couch. "Mila," he said gently, "there's something important I want to tell you." She looked up immediately. "Is it something bad?" "No," Ethan said softly. "It's about your mom." Her eyes widened with curiosity. "You found her?" Ethan nodded slowly. "I did, a while ago." He explained everything carefully, using simple words she could understand. He told her how Serena had become very sick, how she had collapsed at the hospital that day, and how she had searched for Mila after waking up. "She never stopped loving you," Ethan said quietly. Mila listened without interrupting. "Did she know I was okay?" she finally asked. "Yes," Ethan answered. "I told her you were safe." He reached into his pocket and removed the small box Serena had given him months earlier. "She asked me to give you this." Mila opened the box carefully. Inside lay the small silver necklace shaped like a star. Her fingers touched it gently. "I remember this," she whispered. "She said the stars would watch over me." Ethan nodded. "She also wrote you a letter." Mila looked up at him with shining eyes. "Can you read it to me?" Ethan opened the envelope slowly, and for the first time, Mila finally heard the words her mother had written just for her. Ethan read Serena's letter slowly. The handwriting on the page was uneven, but the meaning was clear. Serena wrote about love, about how Mila had been the brightest light in her life even during the hardest days. She explained that she never meant to leave Mila alone, and that she trusted the world would guide the right person to her daughter. When Ethan finished reading, the room became very quiet. Mila held the star necklace in both hands, pressing it gently against her chest. "She loved me," Mila whispered. "Yes," Ethan said softly, "very much." Mila looked at him with tears shining in her eyes. "And you love me too." Ethan pulled her into a warm embrace. "Always." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the window, filling the room with a peaceful glow. Finally, Mila lifted her head. "So now I have two hearts watching me," she said thoughtfully. "Mom's heart and yours." Ethan smiled through the emotion building in his chest. "That sounds exactly right." Later that night, after bath time and one final bedtime story, Ethan tucked Mila into bed. The silver star necklace rested around her neck, glimmering softly in the light of the small night lamp beside her bed. "Good night, Mila Vale," Ethan said. She smiled sleepily. "Good night, Dad." The word came naturally now. As Ethan turned off the light and quietly closed the door, he paused in the hallway for a moment. 2 years earlier, he had lived alone in a silent apartment, convinced that solitude was enough. But a single voice inside a trash bin on a winter night had changed everything. Now the apartment held laughter stories and a small girl who believed in tomorrow. And Ethan Vale finally understood something simple and powerful. Families are not always found by searching. Sometimes they find each other. Did this story move you? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss other heartwarming stories. Click on the last screen to see the next emotional chapter waiting for you. See you in the next story.